One of the most intense controversies in the biblical tradition, the rebellion of Korah. Was Korah a leader who challenged a system of power? What does new research and biblical criticism suggest? Join us to discover whether, after millennia, Korach was right or not. Was Korah a rebel against God, or the first to challenge priestly power?
Shalom, shalom. Welcome, as we do every week, to your channel, Mishnah TV. In this class, we are going to delve deep into asterisk Parashat Korach, for there are stories in the Torah that seem ancient until we discover that they are still unfolding today. And few are as uncomfortable, as explosive, and as dangerously relevant as the rebellion of Korach. For let's be honest, when we hear this story, it is almost always told to us in a very simple way. Korach was an ambitious rebel. He challenged Moses and ended up being punished by God. End of story. Case closed. But what if it wasn't that simple? What if for centuries we have been reading this story too quickly? Today, we are going to step into one of the most controversial episodes of the entire wilderness journey. An event that not only shook the leadership of Israel, but left behind political, spiritual, and social wounds that marked a definitive turning point in the history of the people. For here arises an uncomfortable question. Was Korach truly a villain, or a man who dared to speak out against something that others kept silent about? Was he a power-hungry revolutionary, or someone who detected a genuine crisis within the leadership of Moses and Aaron? And even more unsettling, if the entire congregation was holy, as he claimed, then why did a spiritual elite exist? Parashat Korach is not a children's story about heroes and villains. It is a war over the narrative. It is politics. It is religion. It is power. It is legitimacy. And above all, it is a battle to define who holds the authority to speak in the name of God. And here is where it gets fascinating. When we open the Hebrew text, the asterisk Midrashim, the asterisk Talmud, and even modern academic analyses, cracks begin to appear. Strange details, suspicious silences, questions that are rarely taught from the pulpit. Why exactly did Korach gather 250 leaders? What role did tribal resentment play? Was it truly a spiritual rebellion, or a political crisis disguised as holiness? And why does this story end in such a dramatic, almost theatrical manner, as if the very earth itself had something to say? Get ready, because today we aren't simply going to tell the story of Korach. We are going to investigate it. We are going to peel back the layers, challenge interpretations, and dare to ask the questions that many prefer to leave unasked. For sometimes, to uncover the truth behind a rebellion, one must first question the official narrative. Speaking to you is Abel Flores, journalist and founder of Mishnah TV. I invite you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, to give us a like, and to visit us at our website, lamishnah.com. There you will find a wealth of additional content on biblical studies, Second Temple Judaism, Kabbalah, and our free course covering the entire Mishnah, all in your own language. When we hear the word rebellion, our minds usually conjure up a simple narrative. A disgruntled man rises up against the leader, sows chaos, and ends up defeated. But Parashat Korach does not work that way, and herein lies the first major misconception we must dismantle. Korach's rebellion was not a single unified rebellion. I repeat this because it is fundamental to understanding the political and spiritual earthquake unfolding in the desert. We are not witnessing a mere religious disagreement. We are facing a coalition of frustrations, ambitions, and open wounds within the people of Israel. The text in Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 16, seems to tell a linear story, but when one reads closely, something strange occurs. The scenes shift abruptly. Characters appear and vanish. The accusations are not always the same. At times, it appears to be a struggle against Aaron. At other times, a rebellion against Moses. And at certain moments, it seems like a full-blown national crisis. Why? Because we are likely witnessing several intertwined rebellions. Let us begin with Korach. Korach was a Levite, a descendant of Kehat. And here lies a crucial detail. He was no ordinary man. He belonged to a privileged family within the Levite tribe. The Kehatites held an extraordinary, sacred role, transporting the holiest objects of the asterisk Mishkan, the tabernacle. They were no strangers to spirituality. Thus arises an uncomfortable question. What did Korach really want? The traditional interpretation, reflected in the Midrash and by commentators such as Rashi, maintains that Korach desired something very specific, the priesthood. It was not enough for him to serve in proximity to the sacred. He coveted Aaron's position. He sought access to the very epicenter of spiritual power. But Korach was not alone. Here entered Dathan and Abiram, descendants of Reuben, and this completely alters the landscape. For their conflict does not appear to be religious. Their grievance is political. Reuben had been Jacob's firstborn son. From a tribal perspective, some Reubenites may have felt that national leadership naturally belonged to them. But now, power was concentrated in Moses, of the tribe of Levi. They accuse Moses directly. Is it too little that you have brought us out of a land flowing with milk and honey, only to make us die in the wilderness? An ironic and brutal statement, for they are calling Egypt a land of milk and honey. In other words, they do not merely challenge authority. They question the entire narrative of the Exodus. And there is yet a third group, 250 leaders of the congregation, not marginalized figures. The text states in Hebrew, Nesiei Edah, that is, princes of the assembly, men of prestige, influential, renowned. And what do they desire? Ritual access, the incense, priestly proximity. They wish to participate in a space reserved exclusively for Aaron and his sons. So what are we witnessing here? Not a single rebellion. 3 overlapping rebellions, a priestly struggle, a political crisis, and a dispute over access to religious prestige. And here, something fascinating emerges. Many modern scholars observe that number 16 contains narrative duplications, literary tensions, and shifts in scene that appear anomalous. Consequently, they propose that the text may weave together distinct ancient traditions, a Levitical rebellion against Aaron and a Reubenite rebellion against Moses, later fused into a single narrative. Yet Jewish tradition, curiously, does not deny this complexity. It interprets it differently, not as a contradiction, but as a coalition. Korah sought the priesthood. Dathan and Abiram sought to topple the leadership. The 250 sought spiritual prestige. And when disparate interests unite under a single banner, something very dangerous occurs. No one is fighting for a common cause anymore. Everyone is using the cause to pursue their own agenda. And perhaps that is the most unsettling question of this parashah. Was it truly a struggle for holiness, or a war disguised as spirituality? Now look at this. There are verses that seem simple until you look at them closely and discover that they conceal a time bomb. Parashat Korach begins with just 2 words that, at first glance, appear innocent. In Hebrew, it reads, Vayikach Korach. This translates as, and Korach took. But here, a fascinating problem arises. The text never states what he took. Think about this for a moment. The Torah is usually extraordinarily precise. If someone takes something, we normally know what they took. A staff, an offering, people, objects. But here, silence. And Korach took. Took what? And that textual absence, that seemingly small void, has fired the imagination of the sages for centuries. The Midrash Tanchuma in Korach 2 offers one of the most provocative interpretations of this entire story. It suggests that Korach did not take an object. He took something far more dangerous. He took a narrative. He took an argument. He took a strategy of persuasion. In other words, Korach understood the power of public opinion. He did not begin by launching a frontal attack on Moses. That would have been political suicide. After all, Moses was the man of Sinai, the liberator of Egypt, the prophet who spoke panim el panim, face to face with God. No, Korach was smarter than that, or perhaps more dangerous. The Midrash recounts that he appeared before Moses wearing a garment dyed entirely blue, dyed with asterisk techelet, that sacred blue associated with the heavens and the remembrance of the commandments. And then he asked a seemingly innocent question, almost technical, almost academic. Does a garment entirely made of asterisk techelet require asterisk tzitzit? Moses replied, yes. And then Korach smiled, for he was not asking a question in order to learn. He was staging a spectacle. He ridiculed the response in front of the people. How is that possible? He asked. If a single blue thread serves to remind one of the commandments, does a garment that is entirely blue still need another thread? The crowd listens. They laugh. They begin to doubt. But Korach is not finished yet. He poses another question. A house filled with Torah scrolls, does it need a mezuzah? Moses answers once again, yes. And Korach delivers the final blow. How can that be? If the entire house is filled with Torah, is a small parchment on the door still necessary? Now, observe the brilliance and the danger of this strategy. Korach is not denying the Torah. That would be too obvious. He is not saying Moses is lying. That would have scandalized the people. He is doing something far more sophisticated. He is using seemingly logical questions to turn the law into a caricature. He is oversimplifying a complex system until it appears absurd. And here lies a profoundly modern lesson. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks explained that Korach understood something that still dominates our culture. A clever question can destroy in seconds something that took generations to build. For ridicule is always easier than understanding. Sarcasm is quicker than study. Mockery persuades faster than profundity. And that is perhaps the hidden truth of this rebellion. Korach did not begin by denying God. He did not begin by rejecting the Torah. He began by sowing doubt regarding the authority of the one who transmitted the Torah. That is the method of the religious sophist. He does not seek truth, he seeks an audience. He does not ask in order to learn, he asks in order to show off. He does not wish to enlighten the teacher, he wishes to humiliate him before the crowd. And perhaps the uncomfortable question for us today is this. How often do we mistake a sincere question for a strategy carefully designed to destroy trust? Now we arrive at the ideological heart of the rebellion, the moment when Korach stops merely insinuating and unleashes an accusation so powerful that, honestly, even today it could win applause in any public square. Let us listen to his words in Hebrew. Kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim. That is to say, the entire congregation, all of them are holy. And then he delivers the finishing blow, with a question charged with political fire. Why do you lift yourselves up above the assembly of Hashem? Bamidbar 16:3. One must admit it. It is a brilliant phrase. Dangerous. And most unsettling of all, partially true. For the most persuasive movements are rarely built upon outright lies. They are built upon incomplete truths. Here lies the genius, or the danger, of Korach's argument. He does not invent a new doctrine. He does not appear saying, Moshe fabricated the Torah. He does not reject the covenant. He does not deny Sinai. He does something far more sophisticated. He takes a genuine sacred text and turns it into a political weapon. Korach draws directly upon Shemot, Exodus chapter 19, verse 6, where God declares to Israel, "You shall be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." And here, Korach seems to be saying, wait a moment, If we are all holy, if God is present among us all, then why Aaron? Why an exclusive priesthood? Why hierarchies? Why Moshe standing above the people? Do you notice the seductive appeal of the argument? For it sounds profoundly spiritual, inclusive, even democratic. It might even sound modern. We are all equal. We need no intermediaries. No one should possess greater spiritual authority than another. And therein lies the problem. Korach transforms a partial truth into a false conclusion. Yes, Israel possesses collective holiness. Yes, the divine presence dwells among the people. Yes, every person possesses spiritual dignity. But the rabbinic tradition makes a crucial distinction that we often forget. Equality does not mean uniformity. Shared holiness does not mean identical roles. There is ontological equality before God, but not functional equality within sacred service. Allow me to put it another way. In a human body, all organs are valuable. The heart is not better than the lungs. The brain is not holier than the liver. Yet each fulfills a distinct function. Imagine for a moment if the foot were to say, "This is unfair. We are all part of the body. I too want to do the work of the heart." The result would not be equality. It would be chaos. The tradition understands precisely this regarding the asterisk Mishkan, tabernacle. All of Israel is holy, but within that holiness, there are differentiated responsibilities. The Levites serve, the priests officiate, the people participate, not as an arbitrary privilege, but as a structure. And here, something fascinating emerges from modern scholarship. Many scholars recognize that number 16 centers deeply on a struggle for cultic authority. In other words, who has the right to approach the sanctuary? Who may offer incense? Who controls access to the sacred? For controlling the altar was not merely a matter of religion, it was a matter of legitimacy. It was a matter of influence. It was a matter of power. And so, the most uncomfortable question of all arises. Was Korach championing spiritual equality, or was he merely using the language of equality to seize a position he coveted for himself? For there is a vast difference between fighting against an unjust hierarchy and dismantling all authority simply because one does not occupy the top rung. And perhaps that tension remains alive to this very day, for we still conflate two very distinct ideas: the inherent dignity of all with the elimination of all differentiated responsibility. And when a society ceases to distinguish between equality and function, freedom is not always what is born. Sometimes what is born is disorder. And now we arrive at one of the most human and perhaps most uncomfortable questions in this entire story. Why did Korach really rebel? Because the public discourse is one thing. Something else entirely is the private wound. And this is where the Midrash opens a fascinating door. A door that compels us to view the rebellion not merely as a theological or political conflict, but as a family drama. Yes, family. For let's be honest, few things generate more conflict than the explosive mixture of family, power, and recognition. Let's look at the family tree. Korach was the son of Yitzhar. Yitzhar was the son of Kehat. Kehat was the son of Levi. Now, observe something crucial. Moses and Aaron also belonged to that very same branch of the family. They were the sons of Amram. And who was Amram? Yitzhar's brother. In other words, they were cousins. We are not talking about distant tribes. We are talking about close family, the same clan, the same blood. And here begins the mental calculation that, according to the Midrash, set Korach's heart ablaze. The Midrash Tenchuma and Bamidbar Rabbah posit something profoundly psychological. Korach began to do the math. Amram, the eldest brother in the family of Kehat, had already received so much. From his household emerged Moses and Aaron. Moses received the national leadership, the prophet, the lawgiver, the man of Sinai. Aaron received the priesthood, the Kohen Gadol, the supreme spiritual authority. Up to this point, Korach could perhaps accept it. After all, Amram was the firstborn. Then something happened that apparently broke something inside him. Moses appointed as the leader of the Kehatites Elizaphan, son of Uzziel. And here lies the explosive detail. Uzziel was the younger brother, not Itzhar, not the line of Korach. According to a logic of family hierarchy, Korach thought something like this. Wait a minute, this belongs to me. Moses has already taken the leadership. Aaron has taken the priesthood. And now they are handing this dignity over to another branch as well? Is nothing left for us? And suddenly, everything begins to look different. The great spiritual revolution perhaps began as something much more human. Resentment, a wounded sense of honor, the feeling of having been overlooked, of having been left out. The Midrash is surprisingly harsh here. It states that Korach did not rise up primarily out of a sense of abstract justice. He did not begin by saying, I am concerned about the spiritual well-being of the people. No, the initial spark was, in all likelihood, a genealogical slight. Jealousy, frustrated ambition, lost prestige. And here we must be careful, for this story touches upon something profoundly human. Often our noblest causes are born of very personal hurts. Sometimes we speak of principles when, in reality, we are processing wounds. Sometimes we use grand ideals to mask petty resentments. And not because the cause itself is necessarily false. Herein lies the complexity. Korach likely had legitimate questions. There were real tensions. Leadership was no simple matter. But the rabbinic tradition harbors an important suspicion. When a wounded ego disguises itself as morality, a particularly dangerous type of conflict is born. For we are no longer fighting for truth. We are fighting for vindication. And so, an uncomfortable yet profoundly necessary question arises. How many of our battles are truly fought for justice? And how many are born from a secret place where we still feel we were denied the recognition we believed we deserved? For the human heart possesses an extraordinary ability to transform a personal wound into an ideological crusade. And here we uncover another detail that is almost never mentioned when the story of Korach is told. Korach was not a desperate man. He was not an outcast. He was not an oppressed figure fighting against an unjust system from below. Quite the opposite. Korach belonged to the elite. Rabbinic tradition, particularly the Talmud in Sanhedrin 110a, portrays him as a man of extraordinary wealth. Not merely well-to-do, extraordinarily rich. So rich, the text states, that the treasures he possessed were so immense that the keys to his storehouses required a massive load just to be transported. The imagery is almost cinematic. Mountains of wealth, overflowing storehouses, influence, prestige, economic power. In fact, this is the origin of a famous rabbinic expression, rich as Korach. And we must clarify something important here. Jewish tradition never presents wealth in and of itself as a sin. Abraham was wealthy, Isaac was wealthy, Jacob prospered. The question is never how much you possess. The question is, what does power do to your heart? And here, a fascinating political dimension emerges. For if Korach was indeed that wealthy, then we grasp something decisive about this rebellion. Rebellions are not sustained by speeches alone. They are sustained by resources, influence, alliances, the capacity to mobilize. Korach possessed the means to assemble 250 influential leaders. He commanded sufficient prestige to forge a coalition. He held the social standing to sow seeds of doubt among the people. In other words, this was not an improvised protest. It was a carefully orchestrated operation. And here another myth crumbles. Korach's rebellion was not a struggle of the poor against the powerful. It was not the humble masses rising up against a privileged caste. It was something far more complex, an internal struggle between religious aristocracies, a dispute within the elite, influential Levites, tribal leaders, men of prestige vying for access to the sacred. For often, the most dangerous crises do not arise at the margins. They arise when those who already possess power crave even more. And perhaps therein lies one of the most uncomfortable lessons of Korach. Ambition rarely says, "That is enough." For when the desire for recognition turns into a hunger, not even wealth can satiate the void.
One of the most intense controversies in the biblical tradition, the rebellion of Korah. Was Korah a leader who challenged a system of power? What does new research and biblical criticism suggest? Join us to discover whether, after millennia, Korach was right or not. Was Korah a rebel against God, or the first to challenge priestly power?
But perhaps the deepest dimension of this entire story is not political, nor economic, nor even familial. Perhaps the true fire began in a place much quieter and much more dangerous, the human heart. For there exists a type of envy that is especially destructive. Not the envy of money, not the envy of material success, but spiritual envy. That moment when someone looks at another person's calling and thinks, why him and not me? Why did God choose him? Why does his voice carry authority while mine does not? Jewish tradition views Korach as the very paradigm of this inner conflict. And we find an extraordinary clue in Pirkei Avot 5:17, where the Mishnah distinguishes between two types of controversy. It reads as follows: any controversy that is for the sake of heaven will endure. And then it asks, what constitutes a controversy for the sake of heaven? That of Hillel and Shammai, two rabbinic schools that debated intensely, yet sincerely sought the truth. They did not fight to destroy one another. They debated to refine their understanding. Then the Mishnah poses a second question. What constitutes a controversy that is not for the sake of heaven? And here comes something surprising. It does not say the controversy between Korach and Moses. No, it says the controversy of Korach and his entire congregation. It seems like a minor detail, but it is not. It is explosive. For the Mishnah is hinting at something profoundly uncomfortable. Even the rebels themselves were not truly united. Think about it. Korach sought the priesthood. Dathan and Abiram sought to challenge Moses' political leadership. The 250 leaders sought access to the incense and ritual prestige. All of them shouted the same slogan, but each pursued something different. It was a coalition, not a community, an alliance of interests, not a sacred cause. And this completely changes how we understand the conflict. For there are arguments that appear spiritual, but are, in reality, ego struggles disguised as ideals. There are people who speak of justice when they are seeking recognition. They speak of equality when they desire status. They speak of holiness when, in truth, they want a platform. The Mishnah seems to tell us something brutally honest. A dispute does not become holy simply because it employs religious language. The real question is, what lies behind the rhetoric? A sincere search for truth, or a need for validation? And here emerges a monumental difference between Hillel and Korach. Hillel and Shammai could debate fiercely, and yet still respect one another. Their families even intermarried, because the goal was not to win, it was to understand. Korach, by contrast, does not build dialogue. He builds factions. He does not seek to clarify. He seeks to displace. And perhaps that is why the Mishnah does not say Korach against Moses. Because Korach's true conflict was never with Moses. It was with himself, with his inability to accept a role different from the one he had envisioned for himself. And here is born one of the most profound psychological lessons of this parasha. Spiritual envy is especially dangerous because it disguises itself as virtue. One does not say, I want honor. One says, I am fighting for the truth. One does not admit, I want power. One says, I am defending the people. But the heart always knows the difference. And perhaps the most difficult question of all is this. When we fight for a cause, do we truly wish to serve heaven? Or do we secretly hope that heaven will, at long last, serve us? When we think of Korach's rebellion, we tend to imagine a purely religious crisis. Priesthood, holiness, spiritual authority. But then two figures appear who completely change the landscape, Dathan and Abiram. And with them, the dispute ceases to be merely spiritual. Now it becomes political, brutally political. For these men are not arguing about incense. They are not speaking of the priesthood. They are not questioning rituals. They attack Moses directly. Listen to the accusation. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up from a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you would also lord it over us? Numbers chapter 16, verse 13. And here we must pause, for there is a phrase so scandalous that it might easily escape our notice. Dathan and Abiram call Egypt a land flowing with milk and honey. What just happened here? For that expression belongs to another part of the story. In Hebrew, it reads, asterisk, Eretz Zavat Chalav Udavash, which translates as a land flowing with milk and honey. This is the divine promise regarding Canaan, not Egypt. Never Egypt. Egypt was the house of bondage, the land of whips, of bricks, of Hebrew children cast into the Nile. And yet, suddenly, the rebels do something extraordinarily sophisticated. They rewrite memory. They transform the past. And here emerges one of the most dangerous mechanisms of any political crisis, the manipulation of collective memory. Observe the propagandistic twist. Egypt, the prison, is now presented as a lost paradise. The wilderness, the process of liberation, is now described as failure and tyranny. And Moses, the liberator, is portrayed as an ambitious dictator. Would you also lord it over us? In Hebrew, there is an almost sarcastic nuance, as if to say, who appointed you king? Do you notice the brilliance of this strategy? They do not need to deny the miracles. They do not need to erase the Exodus. They only need to reinterpret it. For when a society alters its memory, it also alters its identity. And herein lies a deeply relevant lesson. Every destructive rebellion must first alter the narrative. It does not begin by launching a frontal assault on the facts. It begins by reinterpreting them, by cherry-picking memories, by exaggerating grievances, by idealizing the past. For a people confused about their history becomes vulnerable to any seductive rhetoric. And let's be honest, this is still happening today. Sometimes the past seems better not because it truly was, but because the present hurts. Nostalgia possesses a strange power. It can make us forget even our very chains. Dathan and Abiram look back toward Egypt and remember only the food. They forget the slavery. They remember the stability. They forget the oppression. And that leaves us with a deeply uncomfortable question. How often do human beings romanticize the very thing from which they once begged to be liberated? For freedom comes at a cost. The desert is uncomfortable. Transformation hurts. And sometimes, when the future takes too long to arrive, the past begins to look unjustly beautiful. But be careful. For when we label our own bondage a paradise, perhaps we have already begun to forget who we truly were. There is a mysterious character in this story. So mysterious, in fact, that he appears for just an instant, and then vanishes, as if the text itself had decided to erase his tracks. His name is On Ben Pelet. Numbers chapter 16, verse 1 clearly mentions him as part of the rebellion. Korah, together with Dathan, Abiram, and On Ben Pelet. And then something strange happens. We never hear from him again. He does not appear among those who were punished. He does not speak. He does not protest. He does not fall into the earth. He simply disappears. And, of course, the sages could not let such a mystery pass them by. The Talmud, in Sanhedrin 109b, 110a, offers a fascinating explanation, one that is deeply human, and honestly, even a little ironic. It states that the person who saved On was not a miracle, it was not a prophetic vision, it was not an angel, it was his wife. Yes, his wife saw something that he could not see. For while the men were caught up in rhetoric regarding honor, leadership, and revolution, she asked a devastatingly simple question. What do you stand to gain from all this? Think about it. It is an extraordinary question. If Moses wins, she told him, you will remain a disciple. If Korah wins, you will still remain a disciple. It makes no difference who prevails. You will not be at the top. You are merely risking your life for the ambitions of others. It feels almost painfully modern. How many people get drawn into ideological wars that do not belong to them? How many end up defending causes that will never benefit them? How many are used as emotional fuel for the projects of others? On's wife grasped something crucial. He was not a protagonist. He was cannon fodder. So she devised a plan. According to the Talmud, she gave him wine to drink, or lulled him to sleep, to prevent him from going out to join the rebels. And then she did something even more astonishing. She sat at the entrance of the tent with her hair uncovered. Now, in the context of the standards of modesty of that era, this was considered socially inappropriate for observant men. Korah's followers arrived to seek him out, but upon seeing her in that state, they did not enter. Out of modesty, out of shame, out of social convention. And while they were upholding the standards of modesty, she was saving his life. It is one of those extraordinary moments where practical wisdom triumphs over fanaticism. But here, the contrast becomes even more dramatic, for the Midrash introduces another woman into the story, Korah's wife, and the portrait is a complete antithesis. Bamidbar Rabbah 1820 describes her as the one who fueled her husband's indignation. She reminded him of the episode in which the Levites were shaved during their ritual consecration, and she said to him, in essence, "Do you see how Moses humiliated you?" In other words, one wife cools the ego, the other inflames it. One asks, "What do you stand to gain?" The other whispers, "You should not tolerate this humiliation." And here emerges a profoundly powerful psychological insight. The people around us can either feed our wounds or help us see them with clarity. There are voices that transform our wounded pride into a crusade. And there are wise voices that compel us to pause and ask, is destroying everything truly worth it? Perhaps that is why On Ben Pellet vanishes from the narrative. Because sometimes the greatest victory lies not in fighting the battle, but in refusing to enter it. And perhaps one of the deepest forms of spiritual wisdom is recognizing when a grandiose cause is, in reality, merely using our ego as fuel. There is a detail in this story that many overlook, yet which actually contains the spiritual heart of the conflict. Moses proposes a test, not a debate, not a vote, not a political negotiation, a ritual test. Each rebel is to take a censer. Each is to offer *keteret, incense, before God. And then Moses declares, "The man whom Hashem chooses, he shall be the Holy One." Now, this was no mere religious symbol. It was not a pretty ceremony. It was not something decorative. It was extremely dangerous. For incense, in the biblical tradition, serves as a boundary between life and death. And here we must recall something unsettling. This scene had already played out before. In Leviticus chapter 10, Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, offered *esh zarah, strange fire, an unauthorized fire. The result? They were consumed by it. In other words, the precedent already existed. Everyone knew that approaching the sacred improperly could cost one's life. Thus, an inevitable question arises. Why accept the test? Because Korach and his followers were not merely challenging human authority. They were asserting, we too can draw near. We too have a right to the priesthood. We too can occupy that space. But the asterisk Mishkan, the tabernacle, operated according to a radical logic. Proximity to the sacred was not a right. It was a regulated responsibility. Not just anyone could enter. Not just anyone could offer. Not because some were more valuable than others, but because access to the sacred fire demanded preparation, boundaries, and obedience. And then tragedy strikes. The 250 men present the incense, and the fire consumes them. Yet here, an extraordinary paradox emerges. For later on, when a plague threatens the people, Aaron takes that very same incense. He runs toward disaster. And the text states something remarkable. He stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was halted. The very asterisk Keteret asterisk that destroyed the rebels now saves Israel. How can something kill and heal at the same time? Because the secret of the incense lies not merely in the object itself, it lies in the intention and in the spiritual context. Tradition understands the asterisk Ketoret asterisk as a deeply ambivalent force. When employed out of obedience, humility, and alignment with divine purpose, it atones, it protects, it heals. But when employed out of arrogance, appropriation, or a lust for power, it consumes, it destroys. And perhaps herein lies one of the most profound lessons of the entire parashah. The sacred is not inherently dangerous. What is dangerous is approaching the sacred while believing that everything revolves around our own ego. For there are spiritual gates that do not open to ambition. They open only to responsibility. And when the desire for closeness is born of pride, even the incense can turn into fire. There are moments in the Torah when judgment seems to come from the heavens. Fire, plagues, thunder. But in the rebellion of Korach, something different occurs. Something almost unsettling. This time, the judgment comes from below, from the earth itself. Moses announces something completely unprecedented. Asterisk, Ve'im Briah Yivra Adonai. If Hashem creates a new creation. And he continues, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them. Numbers chapter 16, verse 30. Consider the imagery. No lightning strikes. No army appears. No fire descends upon Dathan and Abiram. The earth opens up, as if that which normally sustains life suddenly decided to sustain it no longer. And the text is chilling. Dathan, Abiram, their households, their possessions, and all their associates vanish while still alive into the earth. The biblical language is almost cosmic, as if the very order of creation were reacting. And here, Jewish tradition introduces a fascinating idea. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot 5-6 teaches that the mouth of the earth was one of the 10 things created at twilight on the eve of the very first Sabbath of creation. What does this mean? That this judgment was not improvised. It was not an impulsive reaction. It was not God saying, I must invent something to solve this problem. No, tradition suggests something far more profound. The response was already inscribed within the very fabric of the universe, as if creation had been designed with the foreknowledge that there would be moments when the spiritual fabric of a community would be threatened from within. Now, we must be careful. This does not mean that all dissent is sinful. Jewish tradition loves questions. It loves debate. The entire Talmud is built upon disagreements. The problem was not questioning. The problem was destruction. Not to correct the system, but to set it ablaze. And here emerges a deeply symbolic interpretation. The earth, in biblical thought, represents stability, foundation, order, that upon which we walk with confidence. But when a society inverts the truth, when it calls slavery freedom and freedom oppression, when the ego masquerades as holiness, when power dresses itself in justice, something begins to fracture within the moral ground that sustains a community. And then, metaphorically speaking, the earth ceases to hold firm. For no society can remain standing when it deliberately destroys the very foundations that support it. Perhaps that is why Korach's punishment did not come from the heavens. It came from the earth. As if the message were this: when the deep order is shattered from within, even that which seemed solid can open up beneath our feet. And perhaps the most unsettling question is this: what becomes of a generation when it ceases to distinguish between truth and resentment? For at times, the cracks do not appear first in the ground. They appear in the conscience. We now arrive at one of the most intriguing and least discussed questions in the entire Parashat Korach. A question that, honestly, makes both traditional readers and modern scholars alike feel uneasy. How exactly did Korach die? It seems like a simple question, but it is not. For when one reads the text carefully, a real problem emerges. On one hand, we have a dramatic scene. The earth opens up. Dathan and Abiram, along with their families and possessions, are swallowed alive. An earthly judgment. Visible. Brutal. But then something different occurs. The 250 men who offered incense are consumed by divine fire. A heavenly judgment. Ritual. Priestly. And that is where the problem arises. Where was Korach? For, curiously, the text seems to associate him with both groups. At times, he appears to be with Dathan and Abiram. At other times, he seems linked to the men of the incense. And suddenly, one wonders, wait a moment, was Korach swallowed, or was he burned? Or both? And here, the rabbinic tradition offers a fascinating answer. Some rabbinic sources posit something almost chilling. Korach suffered both punishments. He was swallowed by the earth and burned by the fire. Why? Because according to this reading, Korach participated in both dimensions of the rebellion. He did not merely challenge Moses' political leadership. He also challenged the priestly order. In other words, his sin was twofold, and thus his judgment was twofold as well. It is a profoundly rabbinic way of harmonizing the text. Nothing contradicts anything else. Everything complements everything else. But here, another equally fascinating perspective enters the picture: the modern academic reading. Many scholars observe that number 16 contains narrative tensions that are difficult to ignore. Scenes that seem to duplicate one another, characters whose prominence shifts, different punishments, different vocabularies. And then a hypothesis emerges. What if, originally, this was not a single story? What if we are witnessing the convergence of different ancient traditions? On one hand, a political rebellion against Moses, led by Dathan and Abiram. On the other, a Levitical priestly dispute associated with Korah, the Levites, and the incense pans. Over time, these memories were likely integrated into a single grand narrative. That is why the text sometimes appears to oscillate between two distinct conflicts. The scholar Ernst Wendland, for instance, analyzes precisely this narrative confusion and suggests that the ambiguity surrounding Korah's death is not accidental. It is a structural clue embedded within the chapter, an echo of the story's inner layers. Now, here comes something extraordinary. Although tradition and critical scholarship approach the subject from very different angles, both ultimately identify the very same thing. The rebellion had more than one layer. Tradition asserts Korah participated in both rebellions. Critical scholarship asserts the text fused both rebellions into one. Different explanations, the same intuition. Nothing here is simple. For Korah was never merely a single man. He was a convergence of ambitions: political power, spiritual prestige, family wounds, religious envy, narrative manipulation. And perhaps that very complexity explains why even his ultimate fate seems impossible to pin down with a single answer. For there are conflicts so profound that not even a single death suffices to explain them. And perhaps therein lies the lesson. When a rebellion is born of a multitude of intertwined wounds, it inevitably leaves behind a multitude of unanswered questions. At times, the most significant stories in the Bible do not offer us simple answers. Instead, they compel us to think more deeply. There is something profoundly surprising in the way the Torah handles crises. For after a tragedy as devastating as Korach's rebellion, one might imagine that everything associated with the sin would be destroyed, burned, forgotten, erased from memory. But exactly the opposite occurs. After the death of the 250 men who offered incense, God issues an unexpected instruction. Gather the incense pans. Yes, precisely those incense pans, the objects associated with the rebellion, with the judgment, with the disaster. And then something extraordinary happens. The metal is hammered out and fashioned into sheets to overlay the altar. The most sacred place of sacrificial service becomes clad with the memory of a spiritual failure. The text states that this is to serve as lurked, as a sign, a permanent memorial, a visible warning to Israel. No outsider who is not a descendant of Aaron shall approach to offer incense. Numbers chapter 17, verses 3-5. Now, pause for a moment to consider this. The Torah does not hide the wound. It does not censor it. It does not pretend that it never happened. It does something far more mature. It transforms the trauma into institutional instruction. The sin does not vanish. It becomes memory. The crisis is not concealed. It is integrated into the system as a warning. Every priest who gazes upon the altar is reminded there were men who confused proximity with entitlement. There were individuals who sought to enter the realm of the sacred without preparation, without a calling, and without accountability, and they paid a terrible price. But there is something even more profound here. The Torah seems to teach us that scars, too, can be transformed into wisdom. For healthy communities do not survive by pretending they never failed. They survive when they transform their errors into collective memory, when they learn, when they remember, when they establish boundaries to prevent a recurrence of the collapse. And perhaps that is one of the most necessary lessons of Korach. Crises need not always be buried. Sometimes they must be remembered. Not to live trapped in the past, but so as not to stumble over the same arrogance again. For a forgotten wound tends to repeat itself, but a transformed wound can become an altar.
One of the most intense controversies in the biblical tradition, the rebellion of Korah. Was Korah a leader who challenged a system of power? What does new research and biblical criticism suggest? Join us to discover whether, after millennia, Korach was right or not. Was Korah a rebel against God, or the first to challenge priestly power?
And after the fire, after the earth opened up, after the plague, a question still hangs suspended in the air. How can one know, once and for all, who was truly chosen? For the underlying problem has not disappeared. Trust is broken. Authority has been challenged. And so God proposes a final sign. A silent sign, yet profoundly powerful. Each tribe must present a staff, a dry staff, leafless, lifeless. The name of each leader is inscribed upon it, and upon the staff of Levi, the name of Aaron. They place them before the sanctuary. And the next day, something extraordinary occurs. Only one staff changes, Aaron's. The text states something beautiful and almost poetic. The staff produced buds, blossoms, and almonds, all at the same time. Bamidbar 17:23. Now consider this. Not merely a single leaf appears, not just a single blossom, not just fruit. The sign is threefold: germination, blossoming, maturation. as if time itself had been compressed into a single instant. Life emerging from that which appeared dead. And here, the rabbinic tradition discerns something profoundly symbolic. The almond, shaked in Hebrew, is linked to the root shaked, which means to watch over or to act with promptness. We encounter this concept in the prophet Jeremiah as well. What do you see? I see a branch of an almond tree. And God replies, for I watch over my word to fulfill it. Yirmiyahu 1:11-12. The almond symbolizes swiftness, vigilance, the prompt execution of divine purpose. Yet perhaps the deepest lesson of this scene lies elsewhere. True authority is not demonstrated solely through power. It is demonstrated through fruit. Korah produced division, accusation, fragmentation. Aaron brought about atonement, peace, intercession. When the people were dying in the plague, Aaron ran into the disaster to halt it. And now his dry staff brings forth life. That is the central contrast of the entire parashah. For anyone can gain influence. Many can gather followers. Many can ignite crowds. But the true question is always this: does your leadership bear fruit or cause fracture? For a dry staff yielding almonds reminds us of something essential. Authentic authority is not recognized by the amount of noise it generates. It is recognized by the life it leaves behind. And perhaps that is the definitive answer to Korach. Not everyone who challenges authority is right, and not all legitimate authority needs to defend itself with force. Sometimes it simply blossoms. And just when it seems that the story of Korach ends in absolute tragedy, the Torah drops a small, almost hidden phrase. A phrase that, if one does not pay attention, might go unnoticed, but which changes everything. In Bamidbar 26:11, we read, "But the sons of Korach did not die." Wait a moment. What do you mean they didn't die? Did we not just witness the earth open up and swallow Korach's entire household? And here, Jewish tradition opens one of the most beautiful doors in this entire parashah. The Talmud, in Sanhedrin 1010a, explains something extraordinary. The sons of Korach performed teshuvah, repentance, inner transformation, at the very last moment. And the image the Talmud presents is almost mystical. It states that as they descended into the abyss, a lofty place was prepared for them within Gehinnom, a kind of suspended space. And from there, they sang. Consider the symbolic power of this. While the father falls due to rebellion, the sons find a voice. While one generation sinks into resentment, another begins to sing. And here, something even more surprising occurs. The story does not end there. For centuries later, we discover something fascinating in the book of Tehillim, the Psalms. Many of them are attributed to Livnei Korach, to the sons of Korach. Among them appear deeply moving psalms. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul cries out for you. Tehillim 42. How lovely are your dwelling places. Tehillim 84. The descendants of a rebellion become singers in the temple. The sons of a man who challenged the sacred order end up composing some of Israel's most spiritual hymns. And here, an immense truth emerges. The Torah does not believe in automatic condemnation by lineage. It does not say, your father fell, therefore you too are lost. No, Judaism is radically uncomfortable with spiritual fatalism. The father may rebel, and the son may heal. One generation may destroy, and the next may restore. For no one is condemned to repeat their family's history, and perhaps that is one of the most hopeful lessons in the entire Bible. Your origins matter, but they do not determine your destiny. Korach's fall was real, profound, painful, yet not even that fall could cancel the possibility of redemption for his children. For before God, a surname never has the final word. The final word can always be transformation. And now we arrive at one of the most explosive accusations of the entire rebellion. Dathan and Abiram hurl at Moses a phrase charged with political contempt. "Do you also seek to lord it over us?" Numbers chapter 16, verse 13. In modern terms, the accusation would sound something like this: "You have become a dictator. Everything revolves around you. You use power to control us." And here we must ask an uncomfortable, yet necessary question. Does the text truly portray Moses as a tyrant? For the accusation is one thing. The evidence is something else entirely. Observe carefully how Moses acts throughout the entire crisis. When Korah challenges him, Moses does not respond with violence. The text states, "Vayipol al panav," he fell upon his face. This is not the posture of a despot. It is the posture of someone broken, humbled, praying. He orders no arrests. He commands no executions of his opponents. He organizes no reprisals. He does something surprising. He proposes a divine test. Let God show who is in the right. That does not sound like authoritarianism. It sounds like restraint. And there is something even deeper. When God threatens to destroy the entire community because of the rebellion, Moses intercedes. Once again, he pleads. He asks for mercy. He asks, "Shall you be angry with the entire congregation for the sin of one man?" A dictator protects his power. Moses protects even the very people who have just challenged him. And here appears an extraordinary detail that the Talmud in Sanhedrin 110a highlights. Moses went personally to seek out Dathan and Abiram. Think about it. The national leader, the prophet, the man of Sinai, walking toward those who had insulted him to attempt reconciliation, to engage in dialogue, to prevent a fracture. That requires humility, not ego. But they reject every attempt at mediation. They do not want dialogue. They want confrontation. And only then does Moshe become indignant. Not because of criticism, not because of disagreement, but because every possibility for peace has been foreclosed. And here, something profoundly relevant emerges. Often, when someone fails to control a narrative, they accuse the other party of being authoritarian. It is an age-old tactic to delegitimize the leader in order to justify rebellion. The portrayal of Moshe as a tyrant, honestly, does not hold up within the text itself. It holds up only within the rhetoric of the rebels. And perhaps therein lies one of the great lessons of this parashah. The one accused of controlling is not always the one actually controlling. Sometimes the cry of dictatorship arises precisely when someone fails to obtain the power they desired. For an accusation, no matter how often repeated, does not necessarily become the truth. And the Torah compels us to do something difficult, to look at the facts, not merely the slogans. And now we arrive at a question that, for centuries, has sparked intense debate among rabbis, historians, and biblical scholars. Did Korach's rebellion unfold exactly as we read it, or does the text we possess reflect various historical layers that were woven together over time? Here we enter the realm of modern biblical criticism, and I wish to ask for something important. Do not approach this with fear, but rather with intellectual curiosity. For asking questions about how a text was formed does not necessarily imply a denial of its sanctity. It means observing it from a different angle. Many modern scholars read Numbers 16 through 18 as a complex editorial unit, constructed around one central question: who possesses the authority to approach the sacred? As they read the text, they discover something intriguing: duplications, tensions, scenes that appear to overlap. Observe the pattern. First, the earth opens up. Then, fire appears. Next, a plague. Later, the blossoming staff. And finally, lengthy priestly admonitions. Everything seems to intensify in layers. Furthermore, Korach, Dathan, and Abiram do not always appear together in a consistent manner. At times, the conflict seems to center on Korach and the priesthood. At other times, Dathan and Abiram take center stage in a political rebellion against Moses. And the 250 leaders offering incense appear, to many researchers, to belong to a separate narrative thread. Thus emerges a powerful academic hypothesis. What if distinct memories of conflict existed originally? A Levitical rebellion concerning access to the priesthood, a political tradition regarding tribal opposition to Moses, and later narratives subsequently unified into a single grand account. But here comes something even more fascinating. The chapter does not conclude with the judgment. It concludes by reinforcing institutions. Following the rebellion, Numbers 18 appears, and suddenly we encounter something very concrete. Priestly rights, terumot, tithes, sacred portions, financial responsibilities. The priestly system is meticulously organized. For this reason, many scholars suggest that the final text also reflects actual historical disputes between Aaronic priests, non-priestly Levites, tribal leaders, ancient memories of opposition to Moses, and processes regarding the centralization of worship. Simply put, the question is not merely what happened, but rather, what historical conflict is this text reflecting? Now, let us compare this with the traditional reading. For Rabbinic Judaism, Aaron was chosen by God. Korah was a rebel driven by ambition. The staff blossomed as a divine sign. The earth and the fire were actual acts of divine judgment. And Numbers 18 sets forth eternal commandments. Academic scholarship, conversely, tends to ask something different. Is the text serving to legitimize the Aaronic priesthood? Does the blossoming staff function as a narrative of institutional validation? Do the economic laws concerning the priesthood reflect a later organization of worship? Do the various narrative voices reveal ancient tensions preserved within the Torah? And here, we must be intellectually honest. The fundamental difference lies not merely in the conclusion reached, but in the method employed. Traditional Judaism asks, what is God teaching us through this text? Academic criticism asks, how was this text formed, and what historical conflicts does it reflect? Two distinct questions, not necessarily mutually exclusive, simply viewed from different perspectives. And perhaps true wisdom lies in not being afraid to listen to both. For one can help us understand how the text came down to us, and the other, why it continues to speak to us today. For ultimately, theories aside, Korah's question remains as relevant as ever. Who holds authority? Who defines the sacred? And what happens when the struggle for power masquerades as spirituality? And after traversing this entire history, perhaps we finally arrive at the most important question of all. What was the true reality behind Korach's rebellion? Ambition? Yes. Perceived injustice? That too. A political crisis? Undoubtedly. But to reduce this parashah to a single explanation would be to betray it. For Korach's rebellion did not stem from a single wound. It was a perfect storm. Familial resentment, a sense of dignity that Korach felt had been snatched away from him. Priestly ambition, the desire to encroach upon a space that did not belong to him. Political nostalgia, the dangerous romanticization of Egypt in the wake of the weariness of the desert. Collective frustration. For let us not forget something crucial. This story unfolds immediately after the divine decree that entire generation would perish in the desert following the failure of the spies. The dream seemed shattered. Hope was wounded. The legitimacy of the leadership was tottering. And when a people lives through such disappointment, rebellious voices find fertile ground. There were also tensions between the Levites and the priests, internal power struggles, the manipulation of egalitarian rhetoric. We are all holy. A true statement, yet one wielded as a political weapon. And perhaps therein lies the core of the problem. Korach did not lie entirely, and that was precisely what made him so dangerous. For the most dangerous lies are rarely completely false. They tend to contain a kernel of truth. Yes, Israel is holy. The entire people were called to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Korach was right about that. But then he twisted that partial truth into a destructive conclusion. If everyone is holy, then no one needs boundaries. No one needs structure. No one needs differentiated authority. And that is where the other truth, the one Korach refused to accept, emerges. Holiness requires order. It requires service. It requires responsibility. For even the Mishkan had boundaries. Even Sinai had limits. Even the divine presence required preparation. True spirituality does not eliminate structure. It sanctifies it. And perhaps that is the most profound lesson of this entire parasha. Not everyone who speaks of equality seeks justice. Not everyone who challenges authority seeks truth. And not every spiritual cause is born of purity. Sometimes the desire for power learns to speak the language of morality. And yet, neither should we oversimplify Korach as a monster. For within his error lay a genuine question. How is authority exercised without becoming abuse? How is the holiness of all honored without destroying the order of a community? These questions remain alive to this day. Perhaps that is why Korach continues to unsettle us, because he compels us to confront a difficult truth. A cause may sound holy, and yet still be fueled by wounds, ego, and ambition. And true wisdom lies in learning to distinguish between a voice that seeks to serve heaven and one that has merely learned to speak in its name. Korah represents one of the most unsettling figures in the entire Torah, precisely because he does not appear to be an obvious villain. He is not an idolater, he is not ignorant, he is not an external enemy. He is intelligent, he is wealthy, he is a Levite. He knows the law, he speaks logically, and perhaps most dangerous of all, he formulates arguments that sound convincing. For let's be honest, when he says everyone is holy, something inside us wants to nod in agreement. And therein lies the real problem. Korah was not entirely false. He was partially true. And half-truths are often far more dangerous than outright lies. His sin was not asking questions. Judaism has never feared questions. Our entire tradition is built upon discussion, debate, and inquiry. Korah's sin was something else entirely. He used questions not to seek the truth, but to demolish trust. He did not ask in order to learn. He asked in order to ridicule. He did not question in order to correct. He questioned in order to inflame resentments. And beneath the spiritual rhetoric lay a very human desire: power. The ultimate lesson of this parasha is just as uncomfortable today as it was in the desert. Not all discourse regarding equality seeks justice. Sometimes it merely seeks to replace one authority with another, one that is more ambitious, more resentful, and precisely for that reason, more dangerous. For not every revolution is born to heal. Some are born simply because someone could not bear not being at the very front. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson. Thank you so much for studying with us. This has been Abel Flores, journalist and founder of La Mishnah TV. I'd like to remind you, if you haven't done so already, to please subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and visit our website at lamishna.com, where you'll find many more lessons on all these topics, as well as our free course covering the entire Mishnah in your own language. And so that you may continue studying with us, here are a couple of videos I'm sharing that might interest you. Shalom!